Hello, welcome to our Danielson rubric for pre-K training. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Danielson rubric and how that relates to the preschool classroom. We're going to begin by talking a little bit about the creator, Charlotte Danielson. She is a former teacher who has taught in a variety of grade levels from kindergarten through college. She has worked as an administrator, curriculum developer, and staff developer. Currently, she is an educational consultant, and she designed the Danielson rubric due to something that happened to her when she was a classroom teacher. She had a scheduled evaluation with an administrator, and when the administrator walked in the room, the kids were using toy boats as part of her lesson. And when he saw the kids using the boats, he looked at her and said, "I'll come back when you're actually teaching." So Charlotte designed this rubric really to open up conversations about effective teaching practices and what they look like in the classroom. So the Danielson rubric has 4 domains. We're going to start by looking at domain 1, which is planning and preparation. These are the things that you're doing before you actually teach, the behind the scenes things. So 1A looks at demonstrating knowledge of content and pedagogy. So we're looking for evidence that the teacher understands the content knowledge, understands prerequisite relationships. So an example of this is understanding that in order to teach your students patterning, they first need to learn sorting. And it also looks at an understanding of content pedagogy. 1B is demonstrating knowledge of students. So we're looking for evidence that the teacher understands child development, understands the learning process, understands the special needs of her students and how to support them and differentiate for them, understands each student's skills, knowledge, and proficiency, and also understands the student's interests and cultural heritage, as these can also have an impact on the way students learn in the classroom. 1C is setting instructional outcomes. So these are looking at the lessons to see if there is value, sequence, and alignment, clarity, balance, and suitability for diverse learners. So this is really where your scaffolding comes in. As we know, scaffolding is an important part of the high school curriculum. And this is the way in the preschool classroom that we can really make sure that every learner is getting something out of our lessons. 1D is demonstrating knowledge of resources, and these are resources either for the classroom, to extend content knowledge, or even for the students. 1E is designing coherent instruction. So this item is taking a look at the learning activities. Are the learning activities appropriate for the age group? Are they appropriate for the students in your classroom? Are we using instructional materials and resources that are best suited for the lesson? Is the lesson and unit structure coherent? And it also looks at instructional groups. So we know that for certain parts of the daily routine, we are dividing the students into 2 different groups. So this really looks to make sure that those groups are created intentionally, meaning we don't want to put all of the ELL learners in one group and all of the English-speaking students in another group, because we know that really children need peer models. They need other children to kind of model for them sometimes. So the same reasoning applies to not putting all of your lower level students in one group and higher level students in another group, because then we eliminate the opportunity for peer modeling. 1F is designing student assessments. So this item really looks at congruence with outcomes and criteria and standards. This is pretty much done for us because we use CORE and all of our assessments are done and scored in the system, which is already aligned to the standards. So now we're going to take a look at domain 2, which is the classroom environment. So 2A is creating an environment of respect and rapport. So this looks a lot at the interactions between the teachers and the students, how the teachers are interacting with the student, if there's respect being shown and given. And it also looks at student-to-student interactions. The reason being is that when a teacher creates a true environment of respect, then the students tend to follow the lead, and you'll see positive interactions between the students. Another way we can look at respect and rapport is by looking at the eye contact that occurs, proximity, meaning getting down on the child's level, knowing about a child's life outside of school, what's happening to them when they go home, what's happening on the weekends for them, having conversations about that, and acknowledging their culture, which is an important part of many of our students' lives. And a lot of this relates to our powerful interactions training, which really tells us that in order to extend learning, we first need to connect with students. When we connect with students, we show them respect and we set a safe environment for them. And only then can they really learn, will they really be able to take risks in their learning. This is also looking a lot at peer relationships. How are the students interacting with each other throughout the day? Once again, when the teacher has set an environment of respect, often we can see that the influence of that in the way students are interacting with each other. 2B is establishing a culture for learning. So the first thing it looks at is importance of content. Does the teacher understand the value of each part of HighScope? As we know, HighScope has various parts to the daily routine, and each part of the daily routine has a very specific purpose in terms of learning. So in a classroom, if a teacher is, say, skipping recall, then it's evident that the teacher doesn't understand the importance of recall. Okay, so when we look at this item, we're really looking at the understanding that each part of our day has a very important role in student learning. The next thing it looks at is expectations for learning and achievement. Is it clear that the teacher has high expectations for students? Sometimes this is hard to get across in a preschool classroom, so this is where displays become really important. When an evaluator comes in, they're only there for a very brief time. So the displays on the wall give the teacher an opportunity to show the extent of learning that's happening in the classroom. And the other thing um, that we really look at to gauge this item is, does the teacher intentionally extend learning? So we know that there are lots of opportunities during the course of our day where learning can be extended. Is the teacher seizing those opportunities? And the last thing it looks at is student pride in work. Are students excited about what they're doing? Do they want to show the adults in the room? Do they want to share their work with their peers? So this is another item. So 2C is managing classroom procedures. Okay, it looks at, once again, instructional groups. Do children know what group they're in? When the teacher says, let's go to their small group tables, then children should know where they're going. Transitions are big. Are they planned? Are they smooth? So this really looks at how you're setting up your daily schedule and how you're planning for the transitions that are going to occur throughout the day. This also looks at materials and supplies and preparation for your activities. So when it's time for small group, the kids should be sitting down at the table and materials should be ready to go. The teacher is now sitting the students down, and then she has to go and gather all the materials for small group. The wait time increases, and it becomes harder to manage those classroom procedures. This also takes a look at what's happening when non-instructional duties have to occur. So a lot of times, you have to take attendance, you may have to do lunch count, but what are the children doing when those things are happening? Are they sitting on the rug waiting? Are they engaged in an activity? Supervision of volunteers and paraprofessionals. So another thing this item looks at is the relationship between the teacher and the other adults in the classroom. Is there communication? It becomes very evident as the observer if it's small group time and everybody sits down and the teacher aide is unsure of what is happening. It shows that there's a lack of communication. So we're really looking to see that the adults are communicating and everybody's kind of on the same page. 2D is managing student behavior. So for preschool, we're really looking at the expectations for students. Are they age appropriate? We know that for a lot of our students, this is their first school experience. Some of them are only 3 years old, just turning 3. So we want to make sure that teachers have appropriate expectations for how they are going to behave in the classroom. We know that wait time is often difficult for them. So are we making sure that we're expecting the right things out of them? This also looks at class rules. As we know in the high school curriculum, class rules should really be pictures and they should be posted. So are the class rules clearly posted and are they written in a way that children can understand them? We also are looking at monitoring behavior. So is the teacher consistent with her behavior expectations? If 1 minute she's having students follow a rule, but then the next minute they're breaking the rule and nothing's being said, then there's a lack of consistency, and then that usually ends with students kind of being confused and more behaviors occurring. Are the class rules being referenced? We have them, they're written in a way that kids can understand, they're posted, but are you actually referencing the class rules when the rules are being broken? Or are you referencing the class rules when they're really being followed? And then, of course, part of high scope is the 6 steps to conflict resolution. So are we utilizing those 6 steps when conflicts arise? And then we're also looking at what the response is to misbehavior. Is the reaction appropriate? Once again, we have to remember we're dealing with very young children. They're coming from all different kinds of homes, all different kinds of cultures. So we need to make sure that when we're reacting to something that has happened, that we're being appropriate for their age. We want to make sure that we're utilizing those 6 steps to conflict resolution. When there is a conflict, it's our job to model an appropriate response. It's our job to model how to solve the problem while involving the children. And then are we reinforcing positive behavior? In the high school curriculum, we mostly do this through encouragement. When the kids in the class are doing the right thing, those interactions to keep encouraging them are just as important as when we're addressing the misbehaviors. 2E looks at physical space. So first thing we look at obviously is safety and accessibility. So we want to make sure, of course, that the classroom is safe. So outlets need to be covered, cleaning products need to be labeled and put away in a place that children can't reach them. We want to make sure that the furniture is arranged in a way that adults can still see kids when they're standing in the classroom. We want to make sure there are no runways that give kids the option of running around the classroom. And once again, this is a major part of the high school curriculum. So it also looks at the arrangement of furniture and resources. So is your classroom divided into areas? Are the noisy and quiet areas separate? Once again, no runways. And do we have enough room for the area's purpose? So clearly, you know, most classrooms have popular areas. The block area needs a little more space because kids need room to build. The house area tends to be very popular, so we need to make sure that there's enough space for a lot of children to play, and that also helps avoid conflicts. The art area may need a little more space because kids need to spread out and use a variety of materials. So this really looks at the arrangement of your classroom. It looks at the arrangement of your centers and making sure things are labeled, roomy, and organized in a way that allow children to safely use the area. Okay, we're going to take a look at domain 3, which is the instruction. So 3A is communicating with students. Okay, and it looks at the teacher's expectations for learning. So During teacher-directed parts of the day, do teachers have a clear goal? And that usually comes across in the way they're setting up their lessons. Directions and procedures. Okay, when we are giving students directions, we need to keep their age and ability in mind. So often we need simple directions. If there is a large ELL population, we definitely want to use visuals. Even if there's not, and we have some children who this is their first school experience, those visuals also become very important. It also looks at explanations of content. So first and foremost, is the explanation accurate? Is it age appropriate, and is it interesting? So all of these things are really important when we're talking about doing a lesson with students. We want to make sure that it's not too easy, it's not too difficult, it's understandable, the children are interested in it. Otherwise, there's not going to be much of an outcome. And then it looks at the use of oral and written language. So clearly, as the models in the classroom, we need the adults to be modeling correct language when they're speaking and when they're writing. And it needs to be appropriate for the age group. So even with writing, a lot of times teachers have a tendency to be very self-conscious maybe about their writing, and they tend to write it on a paper and then write things on the chart later on. What we'd like to see is teachers actually modeling the writing process. And when we talk about appropriate for the age group, when it comes to language, that doesn't necessarily mean not using big words. It just means being mindful that when we use a big word, that we need to define it. 3B is using questioning and discussion techniques. So one of the big things it looks at is the quality of questioning. So what we would expect to see is a lot of open-ended questions, a lot of those higher order questions, less of the what color is it, what shape is it, what letter is it, and more of the why and how questions. This also looks at discussion techniques, and in terms of discussions, we're looking not just at discussions when a teacher is around, but also the discussions that occur between the students. Because when value is placed on having discussions, then we'll begin to see students having discussions independent of the teacher. And then it also looks at student participation. So are all students participating? A lot of times there is a student that maybe is not participating. So that is not a big deal. So when that happens, really what we're looking at is how is the teacher addressing that student who's not participating? Are you having a conversation with that student? Are you making an attempt to draw the student in? Are you figuring out what's preventing the student from joining in? Okay, so I know a lot of times, especially new teachers, worry when a student is not cooperating with the activity, but it's less about the student and more about the teacher's attempt in addressing the student that's not participating. 3C is engaging students in learning. So this looks at the activities and assignments. So first and foremost, the high school curriculum, the heart and soul of it is the 5 ingredients of active learning. So we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, the 5 ingredients of active learning are present. Okay. Activities need to be interesting, and they need to meet the needs of all students. Once again, this is where the scaffolding comes in. Are you planning for what might happen for the lower level students versus the mid-level and the higher level? This again looks at student groups, okay? On top of being grouped intentionally, as we spoke about before, they also need to remain consistent for several months. So when we create those student groups, we're not changing them every other day or every other week. We're making sure that they stay consistent for a significant portion of time. This also looks at instructional materials and resources. So are the materials open-ended, interesting, and able to be manipulated, as it states in the 5 ingredients of active learning? The other thing we want to look at is backup materials. So as we're planning our lessons, making sure that we have the right materials for the lesson and that they're easily manipulated, then making sure that we have those backup materials to support children that maybe need a little extra. And then this item also looks at structure and pacing. Are we giving students enough time to explore and engage in the materials? Um, we want to make sure, especially if it's a new material, that students are really given the time they need to explore the material before we really can get to the actual lesson. The activity needs to have a beginning, middle, and end. And ideally, we want to be able to give students flexibility to continue when the lesson's over. So a lot of times, if you're able to create your schedule in a way that allows for work time after small group, that often works out because as kids are finishing up, those children, those students that are still interested can continue the activity into work time. So it's really looking to see if kids have enough time to really explore and engage in the activity. 3D is using assessment and instruction. Okay, and this looks at assessment criteria. So essentially what we're looking is to make sure that teachers are regularly taking anecdotes and updating their core. The reason why is because assessment should be used for monitoring of student learning, which means that if when your anecdotes are up to date, it allows you to consistently reflect on core um, and look at the data and think about maybe why there are some holes. Why don't I have enough anecdotes for this area? Maybe scores aren't growing in a certain area. Maybe certain students are missing some anecdotes, but the whole purpose of taking the anecdotes and updating regularly is to be able to reflect on them and plan for your students. And then it also looks at feedback to students. So in high scope, we talk a lot about encouragement versus praise to extend learning. So instead of the good jobs, we expect to see teachers asking questions of the students. And then it also, once again, looks at questioning, the how and the why questions versus the what questions. This item also looks at student self-assessment and monitoring. So sometimes that's a little difficult in preschool. So one of the ways that we do see it is in the displays for students. Because when we put a priority into our displays and students are able to see their work as well as the work of the others in their classroom. And another way that we kind of gauge this in preschool is when we see teachers referring one child to another. So this could happen throughout the day at any point, really. It happens at small group when maybe one student is doing something and we point it out. It could happen during the day at work time if one child is struggling with something and another child contributes the idea. But we're really looking to see that we're utilizing children to help each other. 3E is demonstrating flexibility and responsiveness. So this looks at lesson adjustment. This sometimes is really hard for newer teachers, but sometimes you can plan something and it just doesn't work. It may have worked last year, you may have put your heart and soul into planning it, but when you sit down with a particular group of students, it just doesn't seem to go right. So it's really looking at the ability to just readjust when something isn't working. This also looks at response to students. So a big part of the high school curriculum is really letting children take the lead. So it's kind of seizing those teachable moments. So if you're reading a story and maybe this is an example from a colleague reading the gingerbread man and the gingerbread man climbs on the fox's back to go across the river and the students want to know why he didn't swim, what would happen if he fell on the water, really seizing that moment to start exploring that a little bit. This also looks at persistence, and that's making sure that every child experiences a level of success. So once again, this is really where your scaffolding comes in. When you're sitting down to do your planning, making sure that, either through backup materials or questioning, you're making sure that every child in the group can have some level of success during the activity. And the last domain is domain 4, which is evidence of professional responsibilities. This is going to be your portfolio. So for domain 4, the portfolio you will create, you will essentially need about 3 to 4 pieces for each item. Now, I would recommend you check with your individual supervisor to find out how many pieces of evidence they're expecting for each of these items. In general, it's about 3 to 4 different pieces. So 4A looks at reflecting on teaching, accuracy, and use in future teaching. So some examples of items would be reflection on lesson planning. So it would be a copy of your lesson plan and then a written reflection on how it went, maybe what you would do differently next time, what happened maybe that you didn't expect. The next piece of evidence could be a connection between core and lesson planning. Once again, this would be a copy of your lesson plan and then some sort of write-up about, how it connected to core. Did you plan the lesson based on a core item that was missing? Did you plan the lesson and then end up getting a ton of anecdotes because it related so well to core? So just sort of a written reflection on the connection between the lesson and core. And the last possibility is lesson plans demonstrating reflection. So this is kind of the reverse, and maybe it would be a reflection on something that happened, and then a lesson plan that goes along with that reflection. So maybe you noticed the children being really interested in blocks all of a sudden, so you decided to plan an activity in the block area. So you would write about why you decided to plan a specific lesson. 4B is maintaining accurate records. And this looks for student completion of assignments, student progress in learning, and non-instructional records. So some examples for this area would be core reports, trackers, anything that you would use to track something like school pictures, return documents. Student attendance would also count in this area, as well as field trip forms. So these are just your basic day-to-day or yearly record kind of forms that you would use in the classroom. 4C looks at communicating with families. So we're looking for communication about the instructional program, about individual students, and engagement of families in instructional program. So some examples for this area would be if you do newsletters, a copy of the newsletter, any homeschool connection activities that you send home for parents, and a copy of a family report. Just a reminder that anything we submit, the student's name should not be on it. So either crossed out or blacked out, whited out, whatever. And documentation of family activities occurring within the classroom. So anytime, families are invited in to do an activity or be a part of the classroom. 4D is participating in a professional community. So this looks at relationships with colleagues, participation in school projects, involvement in culture of professional inquiry, and service to the school. So this is looking for documentation of participation in school activities, things that are not just about your classroom, but are happening on a school level. It looks at documentation of collaboration, and some other ideas are grade level agendas, any coursework if you're taking classes, any committees or projects that you commit to outside of your classroom on a school level. So that's the kind of evidence 4D is looking for. 4E is growing and developing professionally. So this looks at enhancement of content knowledge and pedagogical skill, receptivity to feedback from colleagues, and service to the profession. Some examples for this area would be, once again, coursework or any workshops you attend, articles or books you read that pertain to the profession, along with a brief write-up about the article and book and how it pertains to you as a teacher. Any feedback you may get from colleagues or lead teachers, and also professional organization memberships, like a membership to HighScope, a membership to NACCE, anything like that. 4F is probably the most difficult, and that's showing professionalism. This looks at your integrity and ethical conduct, your service to students, advocacy, decision making, and compliance with school and district regulation. So some examples for this would be any letters you may get from parents that kind of thank you, or a letter of appreciation, any emails that you receive from colleagues requesting assistance or demonstrating trust, and your teacher attendance record, because this shows compliance with school and district regulations. PERT paperwork may also be included here. Once again, remember that student names should not be anywhere, but this shows advocacy for your students. And once again, if you have any questions about items that should be in the portfolio or how many items that you should put for each area, please reach out to your lead teacher or supervisor.